Welcome to Session 11, Child Abuse Prevention. During this session, we will discuss how to identify the signs, symptoms, and indicators of child abuse and neglect in order to prevent them. The objectives. The goal of this session is to ensure you can identify the signs and indicators of abuse and neglect. After successfully completing this session, you will be able to define child abuse and child neglect according to Florida law. You will be able to explain what teachers and personnel must do when they suspect child abuse or neglect. And you will be able to recognize physical and behavioral indicators of abuse and neglect. What is child abuse? Child abuse includes any willful act or threatened act that results in any physical, mental, or sexual injury or harm that causes or is likely to cause the child's physical, mental, or emotional health to be significantly impaired. Abuse of a child includes acts or omissions. It also includes any non-accidental injury, sexual battery, financial or sexual exploitation, or injury to the intellectual or psychological capacities of a person by the parent or other persons responsible for the child's welfare. Who is responsible for a child's welfare? A report to the Florida Abuse Hotline is required by any person who knows or has reasonable cause to suspect that a child is being abused, abandoned, or neglected. Who is responsible for a child's welfare? This includes legal guardians, foster parents, group or nursing home operations, babysitters, family child care home operators, child care workers, public or private institution workers, other persons living in the home or having access to the child, employees of any school, law enforcement officers. What is child neglect? Child neglect is failure to provide adequate food, clothing, shelter, health care, or needed supervision. There are exceptions to child neglect. If families have financial inability, it is not considered neglect unless actual services have been offered and rejected by the family. Religious reasons that are being legitimately practiced which do not allow specific medical treatment is not considered neglect. Who is considered a child? A child is an unmarried person who is born and is under the age of 18 and who has not been emancipated by the order of the court. Reporting child abuse. As a teacher or school staff person, it is your duty and your legal responsibility, according to Chapter 39 of the Florida Statutes, to report any suspected case of child abuse or neglect. You don't have to prove anything. That is the investigator's job. You should report that you suspect abuse or neglect has occurred, and if you fail to report the suspicions, you will be subject to legal action. Who is required to report? Anyone who knows or has responsible cause to suspect child abuse or neglect is required to report that abuse or neglect. Any person failing to report knowingly preventing another from doing so, making a false report, or counseling someone to make a false report is guilty of third-degree felony and is punishable by up to 5 years in prison. In addition, the department may impose a fine not to exceed $10,000 for each violation. So who are mandated reporters? You are. Other mandated reporters are healthcare workers, school personnel, social workers, law enforcement officers, mental health professionals, other professionals who provide assistance in family service agencies, and can also include HR managers. When should you report it? Florida law requires that if you know or have reasonable cause to suspect that child abuse is occurring, you must report it immediately. According to the Florida law, Chapter 39, Florida statutes protects children from abuse and or neglect. Also, in Chapter 415, Florida statutes protects disabled or aged adults from abuse and or neglect. What are the 4 ways abuse and neglect can be reported, and how to make a report? The 4 ways abuse and neglect can be reported are by going to the online reporting tool on the Department of Children and Families website, or picking up the phone to call, faxing, or using a telephone device for persons who are deaf. To file an abuse report online, simply visit the Department of Children and Families website. The telephone you can call the 800 abuse number, which is 1-800-962-2873. You can also fax a report, which is 800-914-0004. The fax report form can be found on the Department of Children and Families website. Also, the Florida Relay 711 is available for those who may be deaf. That number is 1-800-453-5145. The department is accessible 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to assess your concerns. When should you report physical abuse? When any injury requiring medical treatment. One bruise may be inflicted inadvertently. However, old and new bruises or the face or bruises on the child less than 1 year of age suggest abuse. Any punishment involving hitting with a closed fist or an instrument, kicking, inflicting burns, or throwing the child. Also note, corporal punishment for disciplinary purposes does not constitute abuse when it does not result in harm to the child. Neglect is the emotional abuse, or neglect means deprivation of emotional nourishment. It also is committed by parents or other persons responsible for the child's welfare. It is also failure to provide a loving environment in which the child can thrive, learn, and develop. Failure can be manifested by ignoring, threatening, terrorizing, or rejecting the child. Abandonment means making no provision for child support. Failure to establish or maintain a substantial and positive relationship with the child. Frequent and regular contact, visitations, and communications. Note, this does not include a surrendered newborn infant as described in Section 38350, Safe Haven Law. Sexual abuse consists of contact between a child and an adult or older child. It may include physical contact, may or may not be violent. Non-physical may mean indecent exposure or photography of a nude child. Non-violent means fondling, touching, etc. Violent means rape. Note, sexual contact between a child and the same age or younger should be called to the local police department. When children disclose abuse or neglect, the effects of child abuse or neglect can last a lifetime and affects all parts of a person's life. Children often find it difficult to tell someone about abuse or neglect. If a child discloses maltreatment to you, the child care provider, it is because they trust you. How you respond when a child discloses possible maltreatment is very important. Children may wait a long time before disclosing abuse or neglect. There are several reasons why a child may not talk about maltreatment. The child may not realize that she is being treated differently than other children. The person who is mistreating the child may be a family member or friend, someone the child loves and trusts. They may not want to hurt the abuser or get them in trouble. This can be very confusing for the child. The child may have tried to tell someone in the past, but that person reacted with disgust or didn't believe them. The child may not confide in anyone again until he feels brave enough or until some major event happens. Because of this, it is important to respond to a disclosure in a calm, supportive, and appropriate manner. When making a report, what does the report include? The name, date of birth, or approximate age, race, and gender for all adults and children involved. The telephone address of all subjects, nature and intent of alleged abuse or neglect, the identity of the relationship of the abuser to the victim, a brief, concise description of the abuse, neglect, abandonment, or exploitation, including physical, mental, or sexual injuries, if any. Make sure to include what, who, when, where, and why, and read the reporter's name, address, and telephone number. When you suspect abuse, don't delay in contacting the abuse hotline, even if you do not have all of the necessary information. The abuse hotline counselors will make an assessment based on the available information and will decide if it is sufficient to accept a report. Note, when in doubt, call it in. If the line is busy, be patient. Don't hang up. Wait for the next available operator. If the situation is an emergency or the victim is in immediate danger, hang up, dial 911, and follow up with the call to the abuse hotline later. When making a report, make a record of your call. Document the first name and ID number of the abuse hotline counselor. Document the date and time of the call, and indicate if the report was accepted or denied. All reports should stay confidential. However, the person who are mandated reporters are required to give their name when making the report. What are the penalties for not reporting? You could face criminal charges, a fine, imprisonment ranging from 6 months to 4 years, a loss of licensure or other professional disciplinary actions, civil liability, and termination of your employment. What happens after the report is made? The investigator has 24 hours to make face-to-face contact with the victim. If serious situation involving immediate danger, the investigator will respond as soon as possible. The investigator is required to contact the person who reported the abuse. If that person leaves a name and a number, the investigator will also contact the family and other people who knew the victim and family. If you make a report but the hotline staff determines that the investigation will not be initiated, ask for suggestions on what you should do next. You can also contact the local Department of Children and Families office to discuss the situation. The local office may be able to suggest alternative resources or have other protocols in place to assist the family you are concerned about. Remember, the report must be confirmed in writing, and a child protective investigator will be assigned to conduct an investigation. What if the report is unfounded? State statute protects people who, and in good faith, report suspected child or elderly abuse or neglect. Remember, if you even have a thought that the child is being abused in some way, report it. Proof of abuse or neglect is not required to make a report. Reasonable cause to suspect is all that is required. Let's take a look at the statistics for child abuse prevention.
A report of child abuse is made every 10 seconds.
More than 5 children die every day as a result of child abuse. "78% of children being abused is through neglect.
Approximately 80% of the children that die from abuse are under the age of 4.
This could be happening to someone you know. Use your voice. Report child abuse.
It is our responsibility to protect all children. For this week's assignments, you will read in your textbook pages 215 to 237. You will also complete an assessment and your competency statement number 2, along with RC 6-3. You will also complete the discussion board questions and respond to another student's statements.